In 2013, Chinese social media users developed a habit of posting and sharing rare pictures of pristine blue skies via Weibo, China's equivalent of Twitter. That's because they were witnessing the worst air pollution in China in more than 50 years. According to the country's Ministry of Environmental Protection, 13 provinces hit record high levels of air pollution. Lingnan has details.
When smog limits visibility, the danger it poses becomes too hard to ignore.
The meteorological center says to stay at home when there's no smog. It's bad for your lungs.
Nearly half of China was under thick smog in 2013. January and December were the worst, especially for the country's two largest industrial clusters, the Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei region and the Yangtze River Delta region. In those months, people were advised to stay indoors. Schools and airports were closed. The haze even spread to the country's tropical islands in Tibet Plateau, where clean air is considered a major tourist attraction. The World Health Organization has confirmed that air pollution is a leading cause for cancer. According to China's health ministry, deaths from lung cancer rose a whopping 465% over the past 3 decades. 2013 was also the first year that China's government began monitoring and publishing data on small particulate matter, the concentration of toxic compounds in the air linked to health problems. Starting this year, the Chinese government is providing live updates on air quality of about 200 cities. Beijing has pledged to spend more than 3 trillion RMB, or almost $500 billion to tackle the problem. And that's creating a growing market for companies that can help increase energy efficiency and lower emissions. Lingnan, CCTV.
Joining me from Los Angeles to discuss this issue, Chip Jacobs and William Kelly. They are authors of Smogtown, The Lung-Burning History of Pollution in Los Angeles. It's a book explaining how LA dealt with its smog problem in post-World War II. Chip and William, welcome to The Heat. Bill, why don't I start with you? I know you just went to China. How would you compare the situation there with Los Angeles during the heyday of the smog there?
Well, I went this summer, which was the cleaner time of year in China, and I did see some pretty severe pollution in Beijing while I was there, and also in inland areas. Los Angeles, of course, had terrible pollution after World War II, and it really lasted well into the 1980s. I remember playing basketball when I first came to college in Los Angeles and passing out after the game. I didn't know it was a stage 2 smog alert. So the pollution was very bad here. We've cleaned it up largely. Now China has a major problem with air pollution.
Now, it's funny, Bill, you bring that up. I remember growing up in Southern California, the professional football team, there are oxygen tanks everywhere, and after the play, the guys would come in and get oxygen. I can remember times where I had difficulty as well. How does it, let's talk a little bit about that, because there is a difference in the type of pollution in China versus Los Angeles. Lung burning is in your title, and I certainly remember my lungs burning, my eyes burning growing up in Southern California on those bad days. And I've been to Beijing and Xi'an and Shanghai, and it didn't affect me the same way. Can you describe the differences?
Yes, in Los Angeles, the primary source of pollution has long been the automobile. And that creates gases in the atmosphere like ozone, which cause the stinging in the lungs and the eyes and irritate the respiratory system almost instantaneously. In Beijing and the rest of much of China, the problem is more particle pollution, and that's from burning a lot of coal and making a lot of steel, which uses a lot of coal as well. And that type of pollution is very bad for your health in the long term, but may not cause the immediate effect that the type of pollution Los Angeles did.
Chip, let me turn to you. China is, of course, the world's manufacturing base. Supermarket giant Walmart imports more goods from China than any other country, as I'm sure you know. And it brings about this question: do you think the West, in some respects, is outsourcing its pollution to other countries, developing countries like China or India or some of these other countries?
There's no question that we have not just outsourced, but we sort of brought in the moving vans and parked a lot of former U.S. and Western manufacturing jobs right into China. The numbers tell the story. roughly 1/3 of China's carbon dioxide emissions. These are greenhouse gases that are warming the planet. We're seeing evidence in extreme weather and coastal surges, et cetera, all over. It comes from generating exported goods. When you look at China's history going back decades, people in the 1980s remember Beijing where there was far more bicycles than cars. The cars that were out were government owned. There were still mule-drawn carriages. But in the 90s, China started reinventing itself even further, developing a manufacturing economy, and people are paying for it when 1 out of 3 particles coming out of a smokestack is for an iPod or for a pair of Levi's or for a lampshade, what have you. We just took a lot of the pollution that we've been dealing with for decades in the United States and took it to a land of low wages and lax environmentalism. And very predictably, the result is a very warming, dirty atmosphere. So in 2005, they said 1.7 billion tons of carbon dioxide came from exported goods in China. We're seeing the numbers were underestimated. And of the 8 billion tons of carbon dioxide, a third of that, so a couple billion tons are coming just from satisfying Western consumers.
Well, Chip, is there something in the LA experience that China can put their arms around and say, hey, this is a great learning tool? You know, he mentioned wind turbines. I know they're throwing them up right and left in China, but we're still seeing smog everywhere.
I will say there is many, many lessons the Chinese can learn from the LA experience. In the late 60s, we had been about a generation into the smog crisis, and though we had made a lot of improvement, the fact of the matter was we were still the most polluted, smog, poisonous airshed, really, maybe in the world. We wanted to regulate cars. The car manufacturers for years had seen Los Angeles as this incredible market with its population, spread out lifestyle. And they delayed and lied and filibustered and whitewashed their efforts in trying to build less emission generating cars. And 25 years after the first terrible smog occurred, the people of California kind of revolted and said, the structures and institutions and research isn't enough. We need to go forward and regulate car tailpipes in ways we'd never seen. And there was a massive lobbying effort in Washington to get this approved on a national front. The car companies were against it, but eventually people power and the media. There was a radio series about the cost of smog. There was 500,000 letters dumped on the Capitol steps in D.C. of people saying, we want stricter control. So what happened in Los Angeles was political will fused with public anger, and we got a waiver that allowed us to put our public interest in front of the car company's profits. I think we're seeing some of that in China right now. You know, usually a society faced with a crisis first goes through collective panic and fear, goes through frustration that the problem isn't being solved because, after all, it's complicated, and if it was easy, somebody would have fixed it over the weekend. Then it turns into cynicism. I think we're seeing a lot of cynicism in China now that the apparatus to bring clean air that is consistent with what the leaders want, there is a widening gap. And I think that's why we're seeing more action, more people on Sina Weibo, more activists coming out of the closet, taking chances, saying provocative things. You know, China today is sort of where LA was in the late 60s when we hit our watershed moment.
And LA turned the corner, and hopefully China can as well. Chip and William, thank you both for joining us. Certainly appreciate your perspective there from Los Angeles, which looks sunny and clear today.